My name is Zubaid Kazmi. I work for Arcova, formerly known as Morgan Franklin Consulting. I run our identity and access management practice. Been in the identity space for probably far too long. Many technologies ago, started back in the Waveset days, and now obviously work with a lot of the different vendors that are across the entire identity space.
Cool, very cool. So I'm Eleanor Merritt. I'm president of product and strategy at ARCON. I joined ARCON about 5, 6 months ago. Prior to that, I worked at Oracle for many years, decades in fact, and I was running identity and access management, development, product management, product support, among other things, when I left last May. So moving now from a much bigger company to a smaller, fast-growing company. It's specializing in the privileged access management space.
So you and I have both been
Yeah.
obviously in the industry for quite some while, and we've
Yeah.
seen a lot of it change. What have you seen from a PAM standpoint, how things have evolved over the course of time around need and also the services around it?
Yeah, so my background is more in identity and access management before I came to Arcon. So I haven't personally lived through the evolution of PAM, but what I'm seeing today is sort of the results of how our customers are also evolving in terms of their expectations. So yeah, PAM was started out as being a way to safeguard privileged access to systems, making sure that people had access for the minimal amount of time, that there was auditing available over what they did, um, reporting that you could see who was doing what at what time, and all of that. And that was a fairly simple need, which is still obviously very much present.
Right.
It's not going away. But over time, PAM customers also realize, well, what about the non-privileged users? We still have a bunch of those. And we like the kinds of reporting and auditing that you get, right, with PAM. So we started bleeding into the IGA space somewhat as well. So then when we got into IGA and working with various targets that managing similar with PAM, it's like, well, why don't we start provisioning users, not just privileged users, but regular users, and then running certifications and audits on what they've been doing over time. And then in order to be able to federate access across these various targets, we built in SSO functionality. So
Yeah,
um,
full ecosystem of it. Yeah.
yes, yeah, and we also have an EPM offering with Arcon, which is somewhat related, right? It's really more about managing your desktop appliances and who can access what on those from the desktop. But still, um, that there's a lot of intermingling around needs and functionality and stuff. So that's what we've seen the evolution. And of course now there's different types of things that we need to manage, the whole area of non-human
Right.
identity, right? We have to consider workloads, API keys, containers, and now AI agents, which are workloads, you can say.
Yeah, I
So,
think I
yeah.
think what's interesting about PAM as it, when we think about it, maybe 6 to 7 years ago versus now,
Mhm.
is that initially, to your point, and what we were talking about was like we were trying to secure the users and their
Right.
access to PAM, but because of I think the concept of zero trust and obviously what's happened with AI identities, we've realized that securing the accounts that actually have the access became really the requirement, right? Obviously,
Right.
the users to those accounts is part of it, but then the accounts themselves. And in the old model, we really had accounts still sitting out there with that access, just maybe not having users necessarily access. So the just-in-time provisioning around
Mhm.
privilege access became a lot more prevalent because we wanted to still reduce the access and the exposure to
Right.
truly privileged capabilities. And I think
Right.
it's been an interesting evolution over time. And the
Yeah.
technology's finally caught up for us to do it.
And I also noticed this personally in running cloud-based SaaS solutions. You know, you will have in the DevOps world, you don't want developers, say, accessing even log files for any longer than they need to. And you need to have track records of what they've done with the data and have they moved it anywhere, whatever. So I think we've got a confluence of things going on as more and more of the industry moves towards cloud native development, AI agents, vast scale. You know, you obviously have to keep up with that from a vendor perspective as well. And that's how PAM has been evolving, right? It's evolving along with the rest of the industry. And it does mean that there's very real use cases out there that power almost every system that's hosted or managed within an
Right.
enterprise. Yeah.
Yeah, and you and I were talking earlier about just the overall the AI problem, right, and kind
Ah,
of what's happening.
yes.
And the fact that obviously it's I think it's been led by the business within a lot of the enterprises, so it's
Yes.
grown and it's embedded, it's being utilized,
Mhm,
and security is trying to catch up. They're trying not to make the mistakes of shadow IT from the past as
mhm,
much as possible. And obviously, RSA seems to be very focused, obviously, on the securing and the governing of those AI identities.
mhm.
But I think there's we were talking earlier, like there's a couple things where I think maybe people aren't considering, right? Which is obviously as AI becomes more prevalent, and you have now an exponential environment of non-human identities that are smart. Some are static, right, from the previous days, and now you have
Right.
smart ones.
Mhm, mhm,
How do we look at privilege, and what does that even mean in the AI world? AI agents obviously can have privilege access.
mhm,
What they do with whatever access they have can change what privilege is defined as within an
mhm,
organization, right? So I think
mhm.
there's a lot of things that the security kind of community is still going to have to grapple with.
I
Any
agree.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, I think we all started hearing about agentic AI maybe just over a year ago, probably end of 2024. So time flies, but there was initial huge wave of enthusiasm, and I think it was based on, oh my gosh, look at this technology, what it can do. And then C-level executives all realized, hey, we're going to have to get on board
Right.
with agentic AI. We're able to move that much faster. It's going to be a huge boost to productivity. But nobody was talking about security. And I found that quite bothersome. And it is refreshing now to be here at RSA conference and hear so many vendors actually talking about security. But even a year ago, among the vendors, there was very few people who had uh, ideas on how to solve some of the AI problems. Like, I think there's a lot of assumptions that we're traditionally used to around control
Yeah.
trust, which start to go away with truly agentic AI. And I think businesses are going to have to grapple with that. Um, do they always want to have a human in the loop directing what the AI agents can do?
Right.
Um, do you want, you know, are you going to be able to detect if the AI agent is, well, first of all, perhaps hallucinating, but worse than that, doing more than what you expect it to do. Maybe it's learned some new things over time. Um, and that also it requires some technology approaches that I don't know are present in such a way. I think they work if everything's bounded within one enterprise, within inside one trust domain. But if you have truly autonomous agents, which you know could leak into your business somehow, how do you detect that?
Yeah.
How do you detect what they're doing? How do you assign them privileges? Businesses always want to have a human in the loop.
Yeah, I think that's a good
Yes,
point.
yeah,
I think I think it's very easy for security teams and enterprises to fall into the trap of trying to uh, be controlling of like technologies, like for example AI, right, which is
yes,
obviously enabling the business, and the business
mm,
is looking to adopt those technologies. I think great security teams are partners in enabling that business. And I think technologies like ARCON and services like
Yes.
Arcova help enterprises essentially
Yeah.
solve those problems, right? And effectively be integrated and part of overall business enablement.
Yes.
But I think what's true is that, and this, I think it's a really great point that you brought up, which is whether or not we want to have humans in the loop. I think really that question upends the whole zero trust concept, right? Because
Doesn't
at the
it?
end of the day,
Yes. Yeah.
do I have to now trust this agentic or any identity that has
Yeah.
whatever access, whether it's privileged or not? And
Right.
so I think it really completely,
It
I think,
upends
puts in
everything.
jeopardy the whole zero trust concept. I mean, at least privilege probably stands, but zero trust is, I think, really shaky
Yes.
ground, right?
And that's why, I've seen a few booths around here. So, well, we've solved all your agentic AI problems, security. Well, I think I would want to question that because there are use cases and situations which maybe they're not as emergent or obvious. But as AI continues to evolve and become more and more agentic and even has complete agency, independent thought, what are we going to do about this as an industry, as people, as a human race?
Yeah.
So it's great that the conversations around this are starting. I think there are a lot of things that we can do, Archon can do in the situations where there are humans in the loop and there are regulations involved and we have a set of trusted agents that we can work with. All of that looks great. And honestly, um, we have demos that we can show that illustrate these scenarios, how we support them, and we'll be prioritizing this over the next few months. But yeah, I think as an industry, we all need to start thinking a bit more beyond the boundaries of what we're used to.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one thing I've been thinking about and curious about your thoughts, obviously, is
Mhm.
that, when we look at just the again privilege versus privilege in the context of like agentic identities and
Yeah.
potentially humans not being in the loop and that whole concept,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Um, I think there needs to be a way to have kind of accountability from AI
Mhm.
identities to
Mhm.
hold each other accountable, right? So
Mhm. Mhm.
maybe SOD policies around certain like so
Mhm.
privilege can't maybe all be in one place, or privilege is broken up into two different components, and maybe you need two. So really, like, I mean, I think that there's a lot to potentially kind of unpack there as this evolves and continues, right? But
Mhm.
I think to your point, we really need to rethink about how we look at overall the identity problem, the privilege problem, and how AI identities essentially change that. And I
Yeah.
think also the other challenge is that we're looking at it in today's framework, right? But as these technologies continue to change and
Yes.
evolve,
Yeah.
quantum,
We have
like,
to start thinking
that's around the
differently.
corner. This is
Yes.
another whole podcast.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, how does that change the entire framework of security? And so I think organizations have to really be understand that this is a journey, right?
It
That
is a
needs to
journey.
continue. It's not
Yes.
type of like
Totally.
a one-stop shop.
Yeah. So I'm curious because I know you work with a lot of businesses and enterprises, and
Yeah.
how are they looking at agentic AI in terms of security and so on?
I think
Are,
it's a
are
great
they even
question.
thinking about it,
No,
or are they?
I think the
Yeah.
security teams are absolutely thinking about it because they're inheriting it, right? And
Yes.
so I
Yeah.
think it's the shadow IT problem we saw, like, 5-6 years ago, where businesses are spinning up, buying cloud license here, or
Mhm.
leveraging, whatever type of AI identities they can spin up for different business units across the board.
Mhm.
And security teams are really trying to get their arms wrapped around it and provide governance control without trying to be restrictive. And that
Mhm.
that friction is starting again, right? So I think, and that's unfortunate because that's where security becomes an adversary to business enablement, right?
Yeah.
And that really stifles an organization and eventually puts an organization at risk. So I
Yes.
think, like, security teams, good ones, are trying to get in front of it and help the business get access to those types of
Mhm.
technologies, but embed security processes and governance and policies and procedures and things like that into the enablement of the business. And I
Yes.
think that's probably
That's the right
the
thing.
number one
Yeah.
biggest challenge. And I think one of the things that we talked about earlier, that, no, I don't think they're forgetting, but it's like another
They're just getting
layer.
carried away.
Right, yeah,
Yes.
it's because
Yes.
it's so
Yes.
big and so
Yes.
fast, right?
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
the other thing that's like, just, it's another layer, is like, okay, now privilege access for agentic identities, right, themselves.
Mhm.
I think AI in general, I think, has two components to it from a security standpoint. One is obviously making sure we have governance around it, right? That's
Hmm.
number one as a security team. And then two, how do we leverage it to then do security, right? And I
Yes.
think we're seeing, you know, technologies and topics around RSA that probably span both of those things, which is
Yes.
great. And I think
Yes.
it's really
Yes.
interesting. And I think that's going to continue to evolve. But, you know, I really think we have to continue to rethink how we solve the overall identity and access problem overall
Yes.
for these types of identities and any new identities in the framework that we're in that space, right? That's going to evolve. And I think we have to be ready for that.
Yes. Yes. And I think we have a decent framework with NIST, and I know what I'm trying to remember at a high level, but the last time I read it, it said that there should always be an accountable human for an AI,
Right.
and everything that an AI does should be traceable, and you should be able to reverse engineer what they did and if anything could have gone wrong. So we've got some basic good starting points here. Now that applies to businesses, whether it applies to consumers, all of that is another story. Uh, but yes, I think privilege access over AI agents, like let's see, like who's allowed to even initiate a call to an AI agent, who
Yeah.
manages them, the fleet of AI agents that might be running in your business. I mean, that's a privileged, has to be a privileged user, obviously, right? Uh, I had an interesting conversation yesterday at our booth where somebody came by and said, we're a company that's starting to look at building autonomous robots. And what do we do about privileged access to the autonomous robots? So again, setting up some very basic key principles under which they operate. That has to be a very privileged user who
Yeah.
has that kind of control. And who's the arbiter of when things are going wrong with the autonomous robots? Are they getting out of control? Are they doing bad things? There needs to be somebody who can, monitor that and take action and, you know, prevent the bad things from happening. But there's this whole world ahead of us now where privileged access just becomes more and more important when you have entities that are AI based, right? And having that kind of control needs to be highly monitored. It needs to be for the minimum amount of time. There
Yeah.
needs to be, accountability that can be traced back. If something goes wrong, needs to be tied to regulations where people who are accountable are fined or imprisoned or whatever, right? So the software around that is highly critical, highly important in the emerging world that's ahead of
And
us.
I think you touched upon the two kind of aspects of like any security team, which is one is obviously detective, right? It's like the
Mm,
monitoring and everything. Like
mhm, mhm.
so, I think on the detective side, as long as you don't give anybody access to delete logs, which hopefully you don't,
Right,
like the detective side is the easier solution, right? Like, so
right.
hopefully that's always, and it could that could you could also leverage obviously like technology to do that, right? To kind of do the analysis and whatever, and there can always be a human element to that. I think the preventative piece is the part that is the issue that people are grappling with, right? Like, because
Mhm,
it's moving so fast, it's so adaptive, it can change. Like, I mean, like,
mhm.
what is privileged in any given time or space for any organization can now shift, right? Like, I mean, like,
Yes,
if
yes.
I give an agent the ability to do certain tasks when it combines with another agent, is that now privileged access, right? Like that kind of concept, I don't think people are really thinking about, and I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of conversation to be
So
had
I
around
think,
that.
the concept of policy management is obviously there, but I think how policies are encoded now, it's not so simple, and because you just don't know, like as you say, how agents are going to evolve and learn. And you don't know also when they could be lying to you, right? When with regular software, it's pretty predictable in its outcomes, unless there's bugs or something.
Yeah.
But right, it just
And I was even
yeah,
scarily. I wasn't even talking about learning yet, right? Like I was
yes,
I
yeah,
was talking
yeah,
about the static world
right,
today,
right,
and like
right,
you add learning on top of it, and that's a whole nother realm, right?
right,
Like yes, like I mean that's a whole yeah. I mean that's even scarier, right? When you think
yes,
about it, right?
right,
So
right.
like the ability to learn, the ability to gain access to do other things, right? To be able to do that job
Hmm.
has business benefit, obviously, right? But then how do you put the regulations around it? And I think unfortunately, maybe this comes a time where it's, the organization has to make a decision. Should I lean in on, automation where at the risk of security, right? Because security can't keep up, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Or should or should security kind of take the reins and hold us back just a little bit and we don't go past that threshold, right? Or be able to take that risk.
Yeah, I mean,
And
with
maybe
security,
that bar will continue to move.
yeah, but it comes back to that sort of dynamic that you talked about, where the security people are sometimes viewed as the ones who hold things back. But we
Yeah,
all know, as security people, the consequences of things going wrong can be, the end of a business, right?
absolutely.
Or be the, result in many, many millions of dollars lost, to loss of reputation, and all of that. So security is clearly necessary. I think for the next few years, maybe our fight might be a little harder.
Yeah,
Um, Number one, because things are evolving so fast. But number two, I think there's a lack of understanding about where the evolution is going, and that the tools around it maybe won't be able to keep up. Think, I'm part of some AI forum with IAM and AI, and
right,
we've got people from all over the industry who meet on a weekly basis, and we just share information on what's new, and we're working on some working groups on best practices and so on. But it's nice to see that people who are competitors are all joining
right, yeah,
forces, because we all realize that um, we need to have the best brains across the industry looking at the impact of AI on identity and access management, and um, yeah, how we manage to keep up with appropriate trust models in this new climate.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
you spot on. And yeah, like even at Arcova, the identity team has been focused on identifying uh, use cases where AI can be an enabler for
Mhm.
uh, doing identity better, right?
Yes.
Kind of like an AI centric identity access management approach. But again, that itself has to obviously have security baked into it.
Mhm.
But then, that will allow us to move faster and quicker.
Mhm.
But I think the goalpost is what keeps moving, right? And
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
that's probably right now the biggest challenge. And I think that's to your point. That's where I think there's going to be some natural friction, right? And
Yes.
but
Yeah.
the I think the good security teams for these like enterprises will try their best to bridge that gap and really look at the business
Yes.
as
Yeah.
partners, right? And I think security teams will also have to look at technologies, reevaluate technologies,
Yeah.
understand whether or not they have the right stack for where the future is going, or even for where they are today, right? And
Yes.
what they're trying to enable for the next 5, 6 years, even, right? So
Yeah.
I think there's a time of influx where organizations, large and small, really have to evaluate their overall technology stack
Yes.
and
Yeah.
figure out a way that how can I make this more adaptable so I
Mhm.
can fill in the gaps and modernize certain components to be able
Mhm.
to meet the needs and the expectations of not only the business but of the security as well.
Right.
And I think
Right.
that's an interesting. So I hope that boards and stockholders and everybody else understand the importance of some of that and are willing to put the budgets and investment into security to be able to accommodate that, because I think that's really going to be key, because that's how, to your point, we enable the business and we don't get in the way of it.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, I'm like you. I hope they start to understand it, and I generally feel like they do, but we got to keep up the messaging
Yeah,
on our side,
yeah,
right?
absolutely, yeah,
On the security side. And I think, things moved so fast a year ago that my observation was us and the security vendors and so on were a little bit deer in the headlights, not knowing how to respond to all of this hype. Embrace AI or you die. And
right,
in the meantime, there's no guardrails. And
yeah.
yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
we had just kind of got caught up to, you know, the shadow infrastructure that has been set up, and with cloud and things like
Hmm.
that. I think we had just got most security teams had just kind of just caught up to some of that, and then like,
Yes.
okay, now we've got that settled, and then AI
Yes.
came out of left gate and just like completely changed the game very fast,
Completely.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's been an interesting ride.
Yeah. The other thing I wonder about is regulations over AI, and I feel like that's not keeping up either.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I mean, some countries they're more proactive than others. So how that's going to affect us in the security world, because we know what could go wrong and what the consequences could, but with the lack of regulations for some of the specific things around AI today in the world, or especially in the US, I don't know necessarily that C-level execs, boards. So I don't know that it's top of mind, but
No,
I do think it's going to be an effort to
yeah.
socialize everything, an ongoing campaign and raising awareness in our talks with C-level executives that they got to be proactive and stay ahead of this.
Yeah, I think regulations will
Yeah.
certainly will come eventually, because
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I think, to be fair, some of those are coming out of fear of the unknown, right? And I
Yes.
think security teams can help bridge that gap to be like, that yes, there's some unknowns, but security can help kind of put some guardrails around it internally within the organization. I think regulations will also help guide companies on how to implement it, but it doesn't change the thing that security teams also worry about, which is bad actors, right?
Right.
Using it for their own purposes with zero, because they don't care about regulation, obviously, right? So like,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
like, there's the whole insider threat, like kind of
Yes.
concern that AI, and I'm not necessarily about agentic identities, but could be, right? But like, just the overall AI problem, right? Identity verification, all that stuff that we've been talking about in the identity space, that is also changing very rapidly.
Very
And so
rapidly.
from a security
Yes.
team
Yeah.
perspective, obviously we're trying to help organizations get to business faster, right? By adopting AI and all
Mhm.
its benefits, but then also preventing them from being bombarded by the bad actors leveraging AI to do what's good for them, which is,
Yep.
blackmail and steal money, right? So, so
Yes. Yes. Yes.
that's
Yeah.
we sit in both of those worlds, right? And that's very challenging, because we're trying to, yes, regulation is great, but we know that other people are not dictated or governed by regulation as well.
I know. Yeah. It is a challenge. But yeah, maybe on a more positive note, I
Sure.
suppose.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I mean,
We went dark pretty
what are
quickly.
you
Yeah.
most excited about, with in the world of security,
You know, I think
AI, all of
I
that?
think what's
Yeah.
interesting from just overall, just general AI, like,
Mm,
so, we both have worked with like some of these legacy
mm,
identity platforms, right? And obviously they had a lot of robustness where you could do a lot of customization and things like that.
mm,
We think about the Oracles and
mhm,
I think
mhm.
that the world, and that's great. I think a lot of enterprises certainly leaned into that. I think as consultants, we were always talking about, that's great when you need it and makes sense, but just understand the technical debt that you're going into by doing customization and everything else. I think the whole idea of technical debt has also changed. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
In the sense that, like, with AI based coding, right? And development, I can that cycle is now a lot faster and quicker and more
Yes.
adaptive.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so what is technical debt from 5 years ago is not necessarily technical debt today. So like, and that's exciting, because I think innovation is where some of that, like, what kind of
Yes.
spawned from some of that, right? And I think
Yes.
that's really what I'm interested in. So I think AI being a part of those solutions is really fantastic,
It
and I'm really
is.
excited about to see, like, I know we're working on some use cases, and I've seen some other use cases on the floor where there's some really smart ideas about how we leverage AI
Mhm,
to solve the overall identity problem, both internally and
mhm.
externally, human, non-human, like the whole landscape of it. And I think that's what's really exciting. Like, it's just how quickly everything is changing,
Yeah,
right?
I love that too. I haven't gone up to the startup floor yet, but I do plan to
Yeah.
take a tour around there. But I know some people who are using AI to tackle some of the tougher problems that have existed forever with identity, like onboarding legacy applications.
Right, right, right.
Nobody,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's sort of
Still a
like
problem.
still
Yeah,
a big
yeah.
problem. It's like months and months of consulting effort and has to be done. And yes, everybody goes, oh, well, we need to modernize, but the legacy is still a big component of most businesses.
Yeah.
And
But I
feel
think
like
that's where AI could also bridge a gap,
AI
right?
can bridge
Not
the
only just
gap.
the adoption, but
Yes.
migrating off of legacy and building something completely new,
True.
potentially, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know.
Or just even if you wanted to retain the legacy app for whatever reason, just understanding how it works and modeling privileges around that with your analysis of logs and so on, you could uh, onboard these applications much faster than what traditionally was the case, which is usually probably a bunch of conversations and getting the right people in the room
A
and
lot of
building up
time,
teams and
effort, yeah, spend trying
yeah,
to just get information and yeah, do the development
yes,
and
yeah.
yeah, all
So
this.
that, I mean, that's a small
Yeah,
thing, but my gosh, that's going to help us move forward so much. Uh, I'm also excited, like on the AI enablement of development. Probably, like you said, technical debt reduction. It just changes the entire game.
yeah,
We can move so much faster, and I think a lot of businesses, ours included, are having to decide, well, what do we do about our legacy offerings, right? AI
yeah.
can help do things like identify dead code, duplicate code, and do we want to go and clean that up? So it's easier to maintain, or do we just want to rewrite something quickly that matches what we had in the past? So I think a lot of us as product leaders are facing some strategic decisions like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think the other thing that's really interesting is that, I think some of the biggest challenge around security is just simplifying it for the consumers of
Mhm,
security products or the people who are responsible for security within these organizations. And so I think we're seeing almost every tool, I think, leaning into
mhm,
how do you leverage AI to simplify for the user the decisions that they need to make or the information that they're
mhm,
viewing, right? And I
mhm.
think that's helpful because it better informs the community that
Yeah,
essentially is using these
yeah,
solutions
yeah.
to make better decisions. But also, I think it helps the overall end user, right, from whether it's phishing, right, awareness or
Mhm,
whatever,
mhm.
to just be a smarter consumer at the end of the day from a
Yes,
security standpoint. And I think that's all good for us, right? Again, I think that bar keeps moving, right, which is its
yes,
own challenge. But I
yes,
think that at
yes.
least like being able to catch up quickly if AI and all these things allow us to do that faster, then I
Mhm.
think that's great for us as a just overall human community. Yeah,
Yes,
right.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
No, it's a very exciting time for everybody, I think. I see a bright future in the cybersecurity space because of what AI is able to enable and the kinds of problems we got a new set of problems that we need to solve. And that's always fun for technologists. And of course, it's going to be highly relevant in the business community as well. So it's a great time to be in the identity and access
I
business.
agree.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, obviously we're biased, but I think identity is pretty foundational, right, to
Oh,
security.
yes.
I know
Yes.
other people disagree, but I think obviously we've been in it for a while, so we
Yes.
have our own biases. But I really I see it, right. Like I mean, now the fact that people realize identities are
Hmm.
human and non-human, and that's how they view it. It really changes what identity means within any
That's
organization. I think that's
true.
really great.
And there's been some recent acquisitions which are kind of interesting, right? We saw ServiceNow by
Right?
Visa.
Yeah.
There's some merging happening in the identity security space itself. CrowdStrike buying Signal.
Yeah.
Palo Alto Networks buying CyberArk.
Yep.
So to me, it's like, yes, it does underline that identity is foundational to security, but I also wonder, are the lines going to be more and more blurred? Like as I talked about the evolution of privileged access management at the beginning and how
Yeah.
blurring the lines into the other elements of identity and access management. Is identity and access management going to kind of be subsumed into overall cybersecurity business, or is it a standalone business? I think
Yeah. Let's
it all
see. Yeah.
remains to be seen,
I
right?
think
Yeah.
different organizations will have to tackle it differently based on their
Yes.
priorities and how they're structured. But yeah,
Right.
I think it's a good point for
Yeah.
change. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. Well,
Yeah. Yeah. A lot
Eleanor,
of fun.
thanks. I think
Yeah.
this was
Thank you.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. Could keep talking.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Likewise.
Enjoy the
Yeah.
rest of the
Yeah.
conference.
You
Yeah.
too.
All right.
Thank you for watching the video. For more details, please visit www.arconet.com.